There are many curiosities in the medieval Gospel of Barnabas. It is itself a curiosity. A large, rambling document, it purports to be a long-lost gospel from the early Christian period, but it takes an explicitly Muslim form, presenting Jesus as the forerunner to Muhammad. The extant work is certainly to be placed within Muslim-Christian polemic. It appears to be written by a vexatious convert to Islam sometime in the 16th century. It is clear, though, that the work has been assembled from pre-existing materials. There are some scholars who want to insist that the work is entirely and comprehensively nothing more than a Muslim forgery. In this view, every article of the work can be explained by its historical context, and there is nothing in it that is not the concoction of the forger. The upshot of this view is to deny that it has any prehistory. It denies that there is anything of value in the work whatsoever, and instead it should be viewed as a vile fabrication, a literary crime. It is an understandable response. It answers the altogether extravagant and belligerent endorsement of the work by Muslim propagandists. Christian missionaries and others run into the work in Islamic countries where it is widely known and widely regarded as authentic, contrary to the plain evidence. Study of the work tends to be locked into an atmosphere of religious hostility. Christian scholars endeavour to counter these Muslim claims. They want to expose it as a nefarious forgery that impedes Muslim-Christian understanding. When we lift it out of this polemical context, however, its curiosities emerge as far more intriguing than simply the product of the imagination of a Christian renegade. It is clear that the work is multi-layered, and that sections of it at least have been repurposed from earlier material, and this makes it far more interesting than just an episode in literary deception. Contrary to the counterclaims of Christians, there are deep layers within the work that cannot be explained as the fancy of the forger. Numerous secular studies of the work confirm this. This does not make it either ancient or authentic, of course, and Muslim enthusiasm for the work is immature and historically absurd, but there is nothing to say that the author has not reached for or had access to older materials that have thereby been preserved in this most unworthy of Gospels. One of the curiosities in the work is a reference to a place called Tiro, or Tyros in the Spanish manuscript, which is said to be in the Transjordan. It is called Tiro near the Jordan, and is also described as being in the hollow part of the desert. Here is the reference from chapter 99 of the Gospel of Barnabas. Quote, Jesus, having withdrawn into a hollow part of the desert in Tiro near to Jordan, called together the 72 with the 12, and when he had seated himself upon a stone, made them to sit near him. And he opened his mouth with a sigh and said, unquote. At first glance, we might ask if this is simply an instance of the Barnabas writer getting his geography mixed up. He is confused about the location of the biblical Tyre. This cannot be the case, though. Jesus visits Tyre and Sidon in the Gospel of Barnabas in chapter 21, as he does in the canonical Gospels, and it seems clear that the author understands Tiro to be some place other than the northern city of Tyre. But what place could he mean? What he tells us is, A, it is called Tiro, B, it is in the hollow part of the desert, and C, it is near the Jordan. The context of this, the episode at this place, is the instruction of the disciples in their preparation for their mission in chapter 126. The Tiro episode entails a long section concerned with the training of Jesus' disciples from chapters 99 to 126. As well as this, we must note that Jesus and the disciples retire to Tiro in the aftermath of the war described in chapter 91. The total framing of the episode, read the whole section from chapter 97 to chapter 126 to see this, is thus: there is war and sedition in Judea, Jesus takes his disciples to Tiro and instructs them, and Jesus sends his duly instructed disciples back into Judea. None of this appears to have the slightest Muslim agenda. This is not Muslim material, nor is it just some nonsense made up by a forger motivated by religious angst. There is method in these notices. These notices were part of the materials the forger has adapted to his purposes, and they are not unintelligent or without foundation. Even so, they are very strange and unprecedented in an apocryphal gospel. To what could they be referring? As it happens, a place fitting this description is to be found in Josephus's Antiquities. The context in Josephus is disputes among the Hasmoneans in the intertestamental period. The high priest John Hyrcanus is forced to retire to a stronghold called Tyre in the wilderness beyond the Jordan. Here is Josephus's description. Quote, Hyrcanus determined not to return to Jerusalem anymore, but seated himself beyond Jordan, and was at perpetual war with the Arabs. He also erected a strong castle, and he named it Tyre. This place is between Arabia and Judea, beyond Jordan, not far from the country of Heshbon. You can find this at Antiquities 12:4-11 or page 256 in the Western edition. If we are looking for a Tiro in the hollow part of the desert near the Jordan, this castle of John Hyrcanus must be considered a strong candidate. It is a place with a very similar name in more or less exactly the right location. There is no confusion with Tyre as in Tyre and Sidon. The work seems to be referring to a very particular place, and there is a place answering to this description. Looking into this further, we find that in Hellenistic times, the Seleucid king Ptolemy II built a town in that location and transferred population from Tyre in Phoenicia, that is, Tyre and Sidon, so that during the intertestamental period and later it was known under the Greek name Tyros. Since there is no better explanation, I think we can state with some confidence that this is the place that is mentioned in the Gospel of Barnabas. Today, the location, now in the state of Jordan, is known as Arak el-Amir, and the ruins of Hyrcanus's palace or castle are known as Qadr al-Abad. This must be the place. What, though, are we to make of it? Why is this in the medieval Gospel of Barnabas? How can we explain Jesus being portrayed as retiring to a stronghold of John Hyrcanus? If this is the Tiro that is meant, what is its significance? It is hard indeed to see the parallel the author might be following. There are no prompts for it in the canonical Gospels. It is entirely extra-canonical. Why has it been included, and where does this material come from? What is the meaning of this reference? What has happened to place this strange reference in the medieval text? We cannot provide full answers to these questions, but we can dig deeper. The first thing to note is that this, like all the material in the work that places Jesus beyond the Jordan, and there is a lot of it in fact, reflects traditions concerning John the Baptist. Jesus takes the place of John in this Gospel. This is very important. It is central. In constructing this work, someone has taken material, probably heterodox material, concerning John the Baptist, and by changing Jesus into the forerunner of Muhammad, rather than John as the forerunner of Jesus, the material has been adapted to the author's agenda. Very likely then, what we are looking at is a reference to John the Baptist retiring to Tiro near the Jordan with his followers, and the teachings and sermons presented there is a body of material originally ascribed to John. Jesus in the Gospel of Barnabas is John. We must remember this at all times, that Jesus foreshadows Muhammad meets Muslim expectations, but the original material, as opposed to its adaptation, was not Muslim material. It was Christian, or perhaps Jewish Christian, and it concerned John the Baptist. The author has repurposed it. So this reference to Tiro ought to be considered in that way. It presents John and his followers retiring to Tiro. This doesn't help though. The reference makes no more sense. Why indeed did the underlying material have John the Baptist go to this location? What traditions does it signal? Tiro near the Jordan, not far from Heshbon according to Josephus, seems to have been a Jewish re-establishment town in the period of Ezra. It is not far from the traditional Exodus route and was the ancestral home of the Tobiads, priests. Its history is very complex but also very uncertain and disputed. It gets entangled in the febrile religious politics of the intertestamental period when Judea was under Greek rule. The archaeology is solid, there are Hebrew inscriptions, but our texts are a mess. Our main source is the books of Maccabees, a notoriously fraught history. Josephus, on the other hand, seems to be drawing on Samaritan sources here. This is especially interesting because the medieval Gospel of Barnabas contains strong elements of Samaritan material or reflections of it, as the Australian Samaritan scholar John Bowman argued. But therein are further difficulties. It was John Hyrcanus who destroyed the Samaritan temple and decimated the Samaritans. Why then does the hero of this work retire to the stronghold of a mortal enemy of the Samaritan tradition? It is very difficult to disentangle all the various threads of this material. The whole background is the squabble of priestly parties and families during the Hellenistic period under the Greeks. There were those priests who collaborated with the foreigners and those who resisted, and shifting alliances between them with infighting and treachery. There were purists, and there was a viable Hellenized Judaism. The pivotal event was the Maccabean revolt, when the rebels reclaimed the temple. There were then pretenders, puppets, zealots and fanatics, traditionalists and compromisers, and sundry factions. Hyrcanus was of the Maccabean party, the Hasmoneans, and high priest. Rabbinic literature refers to him simply as John the High Priest. He remained in this role for several decades. When events turned against him, he relocated to Tiro in the Transjordan. Given this, the war, the sedition in Judea described in chapter 91 of the Barnabas Gospel, and given the sequence of events in the Barnabas Gospel, must then allude to the Maccabean revolt, even though Herod and Pilate are involved. And on other counts, that passage seems to refer to the Jewish war. This is confirmed surely in the Spanish manuscript, where the events are said to take place at Masada. The intrusion of intertestamental Maccabean reflections into the text also seems to be responsible for the depiction of Syrian robbers in chapter 188. Quote, "Now the Syrian robbers having raided the land of Judea," unquote. What we seem to have here are garbled, allegorized descriptions of sedition in Judea, with events from the Maccabean revolt all the way through to the Jewish war and the fall of the Second Temple conflated and overlapping. Such historical conflations are not unheard of in medieval works and may even be said to be common, but this is quite unique. Further allusions to John Hyrcanus are discernible, so it is not a loose thread. In this struggle against the Syrian Greeks, it was Hyrcanus who first approached the Romans for assistance. As we know subsequently, the Romans eventually chased out the Greeks but didn't restore Jewish autonomy. Instead, they replaced the Hasmoneans with Herod and a priesthood of compliant Sadducees. But in Hyrcanus' time, the Roman Republic, then growing in power and influence, was a good option. The first support for Hyrcanus from the Romans took the form of 2 decrees from the Senate. These formed a treaty of friendship and cooperation between the Romans and the Hasmoneans. This appears among the strange historical contortions in the Gospel of Barnabas. Chapter 97. Quote, "Then answered the priest with the governor and the king, saying, Distress not thyself, O Jesus, Holy One of God, because in our time shall not this sedition be any more, seeing that we will write to the sacred Roman Senate in such wise that by imperial decree none shall any more call thee God or Son of God. Chapter 210. Whereupon the priest prayed the governor to write unto Rome to the Senate the whole matter, which thing the governor did, wherefore the Senate had compassion on Israel, and decreed that on pain of death none shall call Jesus the Nazarene, prophet of the Jews, either God or Son of God. And also from 210, for so it was that twice the Roman Senate has sent a decree concerning Jesus. Unquote. Note, for so it was that twice the Roman Senate had sent a decree. If we can be certain that Tiro near the Jordan is the stronghold of the high priest John Hyrcanus, then these notices of two Senate decrees must surely belong to and confirm the same identification. It was John Hyrcanus who extracted two decrees from the Roman Senate. As it says, for so it was that twice the Roman Senate had sent a decree. To recap, the Gospel of Barnabas mentions a place called Tiro beyond the Jordan, and the Gospel of Barnabas mentions that the Roman Senate made two decrees at the behest of the chief priest. This configuration must allude to John Hyrcanus. This all suggests perhaps a layer with certain Hasmonean sympathies in the underlying material in the Barnabas Gospel. We don't have the time presently to explore what this might mean, but it's certainly fascinating. Much more work needs to be done to navigate this text through various religious and political sympathies in order to better understand its sources and background. There appears to be at least residues of material about John Hyrcanus. The factionalism among priests and high priests of the relevant period is exceedingly daunting, and it is very difficult to know whether the Barnabas Gospel reflects any sure knowledge of an ancient history. How did this material get into the medieval document? Nothing useful is revealed at Tiro today. The stone ruins of Hyrcanus' castle, so-called, is now a minor tourist destination. It's one of the best preserved buildings of the Hellenistic period in the Holy Land. It conforms pretty much to what Josephus describes. It shows a surprising degree of Hellenization. There is nothing there that sheds any light upon the medieval Gospel of Barnabas and why that place should appear in this text, and least of all, why it depicts Jesus and or John the Baptist going there. It is encouraging, though, that the notice to Tiro is not the result of wildly errant geography. Perhaps most suggestively, we should notice that the medieval Gospel of Barnabas stylizes the Maccabean revolt, the war in chapter 91, as a war about the status and meaning of the Messiah. The dispute is about Jewish messianic ideologies. This is muted in the canonical Gospels, which have an almost pastoral atmosphere of fishermen and carpenters. The Gospel of Barnabas has restored the story of Jesus to a Judea as an extended war zone from the Maccabean revolt through to the destruction of Herod's temple, and in fact beyond that, to the Bar Kokhba revolt. That atmosphere in the Gospel of Barnabas is not altogether inaccurate. Anyway, this strange medieval work places the Gospel narrative amongst material that reflects upon people, events, and struggles in the intertestamental period. It collapses and conflates several periods together. Imagine it like this. Take a short history of all the strife in Judea from the Maccabees to the downfall of the temple, seeing it all in a single sweep. From a distance, it all becomes one series of events, especially if you lose all sense of proper chronology. Now use that as the backdrop to the Jesus story. That seems to be what has happened here. The notice concerning Tiro beyond the Jordan is a key into this dimension of the work.